Welcome to that episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us on Patreon and give us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about poisons in RPGs. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Kier.
I'm Haley.
And I'm Jay from Gallifrey Public Radio,
a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network.
just like the one you're listening to right now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual.
Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready, because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Welcome to Just One More Fix. Couple quick announcements. First off, and I guess the most pressing, is that this Saturday, May 12th, we will be running games at the store game in Terre Haute on South 7th Street from 1 to 5. This be this May 12th. And we're going to be running The Blood and the Chocolate, Dresden Files Accelerated, Quiet Year, and Fiasco, and some of those are subject to change. We'll see how things go, but that is the plan as of right now. And we'll be there from 1 to 5. So if you guys are in the Indiana or Terre Haute area, I guess Indiana, Illinois, in the Iliana area, and you want to come out and hang out and play some games with us, we will be there, and you guys should come check us out, and it'll be awesome. Next thing is, hopefully you guys did well in your Gen Con events lottery. I didn't actually submit for any games this time. I don't know. There was not a whole lot that I was really super wanting to get into this year. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I think I'm going to spend a lot of times at Games on Demand, hopefully. That's
my plan, too.
That's my plan.
It was anything that I would want to play will probably be there. And anything else I would want to play will probably only have one event that's going to be full.
Well, even if you didn't do well in the event lottery, we have had a lot of happy accidents at Games on Demand. We have found a lot of games that we may not have tried normally, but we sat down to play them and had a great time. If you're frustrated because you didn't get into whatever events you wanted to, I completely understand that because I've been down that road many times before, but it doesn't have to ruin your entire convention for you. There's still lots of awesome things to go out and check out. So Games on Demand is totally worth it. And I think there's another indie game group that is running games as well. I think the Indie Games Network may be involved with them or something.
You could also run the event that you wanted to play in at the con just out of spite. That would really show us.
Well, actually, this is something, little fun side note. When we were at HoosierCon, there was a person I was talking to there, and they said they run games at Gen Con just so they can play them. Mm-hmm. There was board games they wanted to play, but they never had enough people to play them, so they would host the board game just so that they could actually play it. And I was like, that is a really cool, subversive way to be able to get to play the game that you really like but never get to.
Actually, a whole event segment scheduled for the Contessa group called Big Board Games, where they encourage you to run board game events for games you have at home but can never get enough players to play.
Well, that's cool. It's a really cool idea. It totally is. It definitely is. If you looked online to see if we are running any games at Gen Con this year, I didn't get to submitting the events in time. Now, I think I can still submit them and get them put up to run. But if I can't, I'm going to check in with the Games on Demand people and see if we can't run some Mashed and maybe some Lamentations there. So we will see what happens, and we'll keep you posted with how that goes. So last announcement is, not last announcement, I guess, but the last thing is that we have had several people that we wanted to give a quick shout out to that have given us reviews on iTunes. And the first one is from Your One Nightmare. It says, Jacob from Nerdalopedia here. These folks have a great podcast that gives insight into tabletop gaming, so that's pretty awesome. So shout out to them. I think I'm reasonably certain that I met him at Gen Con last year. Yeah, Nerdalopedia. So I met them at one of the podcast seminars at Gen Con. I had a good time. Next one is from Somnium36. I really love the small roundtable discussions Just One More Fix does, especially since they cover a lot of topics I don't give much thought to when running games. They clearly have a wealth of knowledge on a variety of games, which I love. Plus, they do APs as well.
Our small roundtable discussions are my favorite, too.
I like doing them, too, but I feel like sometimes...
It's just the random talk about nothing. It's good.
True. We should do more of them. I know when we initially started doing them, it was I don't know.
Then I felt like we were doing them forever. Because we were just
3 months.
why bother coming up with something to talk about? We just talk.
And the last one is from Jagged Sun, a great podcast by some very knowledgeable gamers. I enjoy listening to their commentary and even small talk discussion throughout the series. Highly recommend for gamers of all types. So thanks for the ratings and reviews there at iTunes. We really appreciate it. It's pretty awesome. So it's kind of hard to get feedback doing this sometimes.
Well, I mean, if we don't get feedback, I just assume that I'm awesome. I don't actually need anybody to tell me.
I'm a paramedic. I know I'm awesome.
Because God, half-step me.
It's right. I work by Paramagic. I'll show you what's up. All right.
Speaking of Paramagic. It's a natural segue.
There we go. So today, speaking of Paramagic, as Lacey says, we're going to talk about poisons in RPGs. Poison is something that gets used in a lot of games where it's just more of you get attacked by this thing, you roll a save.
But does it though? I mean, other than like, what is there, like the poison dart trap? And that's like the one thing.
Well, no, but there's lots of creatures that have poison that do things to you. And you can buy lots of poisons, I suppose, if that's what you're into, but they're kind of expensive in most like D&D style games.
Guess maybe I haven't played enough D&D. I don't know. Never bought a poison in a D&D campaign.
Oh, well. Cool, you're not dealing with people that are trying to kill each other.
I did die from a poison dart trap once, though. So. This is why it's close in my mind. I don't know.
So I guess what the ones that we're going to talk about here are
classics,
natural poisons. I guess you might say, like they're naturally occurring in the real world.
Romantic era poisons. That's how I'm referring to them. REP.
REP. What we thought we might do is talk about how the poisons actually affect you and the symptoms that you will see in the people that have been poisoned. And maybe that could give you sort of put a different light on it, because poison just seems to be this thing in my experience where you made a save. Oh, you failed it. Lose a D4 con. Okay. Tomorrow we'll make another save. And that's what happens.
My goal here is just to make your poisons more interesting.
Yeah. That's really what we're trying to go for. The other thing we thought of is
blah, 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 generic poison.
Yeah.
And you die. How boring is that?
Well, and then also, if you wanted to use
what you need is lidocaine powder, tasteless, scentless.
But that takes like, what do you call it? Like modern
years of built up immunity,
chemistry. Yeah, to be able to do. So the other thing is if you wanted to run a mystery scenario where there are several different possibilities of what poison it could be, you could use. We're going to talk about some of the differences in the symptoms that you would see in the patients, or in the victims of these poisonings. But that way, if there's the potential that you have 3 different suspects and each of them might have access to a specific style of poison depending on where they are or what they do or what they could harvest.
I was just thinking about patients and then victims, and then I was thinking about MASH and the suicide is painless thing and how I can hum that entire tune thanks to work.
Yeah. So fun fact, the hospital in Danville, the ER, when you call in a radio report from an ambulance to let the ER staff know, it plays the MASH song overhead to tell them to go to the radio and answer, which is really pretty awesome. It's a cool thing. It's better than like some beeping.
Then people complained about it because of what the title of the song is.
Alrighty. So anyway, I digress. So I guess we're going to jump in right into this, and we are going to go from least lethal to most lethal. All right, so the first one...
Nightshade. Deadly Nightshade, if you will.
Belladonna, Deadly Nightshade. And this one I think everybody probably should have heard of.
Also, it's very near and dear to our heart, thanks to Meister Nightshade.
Yeah, so... Greg, who you've heard on the podcast before. I know we try to avoid game store discussion, but if he was here, he would shake his head and laugh and hang it. And
so we had a Song of Ice and Fire game, and our friend Greg was playing a Meister for our house. We had a whole group of folks, and he was trying to help someone out with a little milk of the poppy.
First off, there was a tournament that happened, and someone took a lance in the face, maybe on purpose, and it was a noble, and they were suffering. So the house that the characters were from sent their maester there to ease his pain, and not ease his pain, not kill him, but, to take the edge off the pain. So Greg, we had him make the healing roll to apply the milk of the poppy appropriately. And he said he was very good at that. And the only way that he could fail is if he rolled all 1s on his dice pool. And I believe out of 7 dice, he rolled 5 1s and 2 2s. And was like, oh no. And so our solution, or I was running the game, and I thought, well, it stands to reason that you just made a medication error and you grabbed the wrong vial and applied Deadly Nightshade to your patient, or victim in this case. And he was immediately poisoned and died, and a lot of drama fell out from that. So that is where if you ever hear us make the reference to Maester Nightshade, that's where it comes from. So it was a great moment of DICE betraying their owner. And
I can't even remember what his character's actual name was. It was forever after.
Yeah, Maester
Nightshade.
Yep. So whenever there's a terrible rill, they've been Maester Nightshaded. So Deadly Nightshade. Nightshade is the name of the plant. It's also called belladonna, but it's called belladonna because it's Italian for beautiful lady, and they used to use it as a more or less like a makeup or a beauty treatment because it makes your eyeballs dilate. So it makes your eyes seem bigger is what they thought. So your pupils would dilate and get real big, and you'd have these big dark.
I think there's some serious parallels between this and Botox. Botulinum.
You're totally right. So
anyhow.
So they would dilute
next on terrible beauty tips of the 14th century.
Right. So they would dilute it down, and they would apply it like eye drops to their eyes, and it would dilate their eyes. So the interesting thing about nightshade is the root of the chemical that causes all these problems is called atropine.
So what you're going to see with this is something that we call anticholinergic effects. Mm-hmm. So there are some fun phrases that go along with this type of symptom.
Right. So there's a list of 5 of them, and these are easy to remember, and it's dry as a bone, mad as a hatter, red as a beet, blind as a bat, and hot as a hare. And we'll kind of break each of these down real quick. So this is what you're going to see in the patient or victim or however you want to put this into your game. So dry as a bone is they are literally dry as a bone. So their mouth is dry, their mucous membranes are dry, they're going to be extremely thirsty, like have this unquenchable thirst. Their eyes will dry out, no tears, no watery eyes, no nothing like that. Completely literally dry as a bone. That's why they have that pneumonic device to help you remind that. So
mnemonic devices are actually like where it spells out the...
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Maybe not.
I'm just an idiot. It's okay.
So mad as a hatter is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. They will act like what a regular person thinks of as a stereotypical crazy person. Mm-hmm. So manic is kind of the way that I think of it, but they're all over the place.
Irrational,
impossible to reason with, and highly energetic.
Mm-hmm. The reason it's called mad as a hatter is because when they used to make fine hats at haberdasheries, they would use mercury in the production of the hats. So the haberdashers that made the hats would lose their mind from mercury poisoning. That's why it's called mad as a hatter. The next one is red as a beet, and it literally is red as a beet. So their skin is going to flush, and not flush like I'm embarrassed or I'm hot, like flush like I am red. Beet, bright red, and not just your face, but sometimes your entire body.
Like a sunburn, like a really good sunburn.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's the face first and then the rest of the body, but it's going to be everywhere, like systemic.
Blind as a bat.
It's kind of self-explanatory.
You can't see.
Yeah.
You lose some vision.
So depending on how bad the poisoning is, they may have vision disturbances or blurriness, but they're going to have problems seeing. And part of that comes with the dilation of the eyes. So their pupils are going to get real big, which is going to let more light in. And if you've ever had your eyes dilated, that's exactly what this is until blindness. So it's terribly uncomfortable. You're not going to be able to see very well. It's painful and that kind of stuff. The last one is hot as a hare, and this kind of goes along with red as a beet, is that you are hot, on fire. Like, strip my clothes off because I'm too hot and I can't take this. It's like you feel like you're sort of being burned alive. It's just, and they will be physically hot to the touch. Not feverish, hot to the touch. There's a big difference between the two. So
from a game perspective, I love the idea of having some kind of villain that's having like a Mad Hatter's tea party sort of situation.
Right.
Where you're serving all the guests nightshade in this tea, and so everybody's getting a little crazier, and so exactly what it sounds like, especially since the whole anticholinergic Mad as a Hatter thing. So I think it could play off very well in some kind of fairy tale nonsense.
Right on. So the one quick thing, a note about nightshade is that it's also in the same family as mandrake, tomatoes, and potatoes. The family of plant it is. They have these sort of curling petals on their flowers, which tomatoes weren't initially native to Europe. So when Europeans encountered tomatoes, they thought they were poisonous, like belladonna or deadly nightshade, because they had this same shape to their flower petals and leaves, and they didn't eat them and completely avoided them all the way through, I believe, like the 17th and 18th centuries.
And like many things, I wonder, who was the first person that decided, I'm going to try this.
Well, here in the States, though, the Native Americans, they knew that they ate them. They knew that they weren't poisonous because they've been here forever. It wasn't a new plant to them. It's same old tomato. So along with that, the Mad as a Hatter and all that stuff, some other symptoms you're going to see is hypertension, if it really matters. If you're in a more modern game, they're going to have really high blood pressure, and their heart is going to be running away, and the dilated pupils. So they're going to feel heart palpitations like it's running off. They're going to feel feverish, dry mouth, and dilated pupils. This is the least lethal one we have on this list, and its LD50 is 50 to 75 milligrams per kilogram. So the LD50 stands for lethal dose for 50% of the people that would take this. So if you gave 50%, or if you gave 100 people this dose of 50 to 75 milligrams per kilogram, half of them would die. That's basically what it represents. So
for us, it's basically just a metric of poisonousness.
You're right. How deadly.
Toxicity.
How far away do you want to stay safe from this stuff?
So this is on the low end of toxicity spectrum, but still very deadly.
Yeah, still not good. Still not good. I guess U is the lowest.
Oh, dang.
All right, so we made a mistake on my list here, but that's okay. So we're going to do U next, and U is a tree. Comes from a tree, and it has berries that grow on it, and the poison is largely contained in the seeds. And its LD50 is 200 to 400 milligrams per kilogram, so it's not nearly as deadly. Now, a yew tree is an evergreen tree, and this is a very fast-acting poison. So it's up to 3 hours, and if it's going to be a lethal dose, they're going to be dead. So they talk about this being a rapid collapse. It's associated. A lot of these symptoms are the same, but nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, again, dilated pupils. But one of the interesting things with this one is specifically blue lips. So their lips will turn blue. It'll be bradycardia, so their heart is slowing down. They'll feel like they can't breathe, some shortness of breath, and then eventually respiratory failure, seizure, and also loss of perception. So this blindness thing going on. So there is some similarities between the belladonna and the yew, but again, the blue lips would be one of the biggest
distinguishing factors.
Yes, and then it also doesn't have the fever or the red as a beet and all those other things.
Yew is probably my favorite one on this list, because the yew tree itself comes with so much other symbolism in lore. So I think that kind of adds to the coolness factor of this particular one. And so you talked about the yew tree being an evergreen and having berries, but it also tends to grow solo where a lot of trees do not. So isolated trees, you're more likely to see a yew tree in that capacity. And they have a very distinct kind of twisting trunk to them. And they live for a very long time. Some of the oldest trees in Europe are yew trees, like thousands of years old, not just hundreds of years old. And so you see them in churchyards frequently. So they have kind of this mysterious kind of religiousness to them. They're also a big part of Celtic lore. And another fact that I thought was interesting, like you have this plant with these terrible poisonous seeds, and yet other parts of it are fine. And it's actually very common back in the day for the wine barrels in Ireland to be made out of yew.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
And lots of other things were made out of it as well. Just in general, the symbolism behind the yew tree, it tends to be associated both with longevity because the trees live for so long, but it can also be a symbol of doom and destruction. Kind of fits with that sort of old crone kind of aspect, or maybe even something to do with like mythology wise, sort of old gods punishing new settlers sort of feel. Even
outside of it living a long time, it's also undying. It's an evergreen?
Yes, it's an evergreen. Okay. So when you think about, you have like this woods full of deciduous trees, and then you have this one evergreen tree who's by itself, and as opposed to these tall, straight, even trunks, you've got this twisted, gnarled looking tree. So it's just kind of very iconic feeling to me. It looks like the kind of tree that a crone would have outside of her hut.
Right. All these you can Google them, and they'll bring images right up of them by these names. Now the actual active ingredient in the poison is called taxine, Taxine, if you're interested. Because while we're going to focus more on these things from a more medieval or fantasy period perspective, all these things can be distilled down, and the chemicals could be extracted to make a more potent version of this. So the LD50s that we're giving are from the plants themselves, not from the distilled chemicals. So the next one on the list, which most people probably have heard, is hemlock. So hemlock's active ingredient is conine, It's CONIINE. I don't know how you pronounce it, double I, but I'm not familiar with that. And the LD50 on it is 5 milligrams per kilogram. And the interesting thing about hemlock is that it's commonly mistaken for other edible plants. So the bottom of it looks like a carrot or a parsnip, like the root area of it, and the leaves look like parsley or parsnips. I'm sorry, just look like parsley. So it's what
I absolutely love the idea of punishing your players with a failed foraging or survival roll and having them find hemlock.
Right.
I know that's evil because there's no antidote for hemlock, and you could probably just have a TPK making some stew.
Yes.
But, why are combat rolls the only ones that should come with serious consequences?
Actually, it's an important thing that we forgot to mention is that for the yew tree, there is no treatment for it. Even today, there's no treatment for being poisoned by it. The belladonna, there are some treatments that they can give you because it's just an atropine, and there are medications that we could give in modern times. But in terms of in a period of time, there's no way to treat the belladonna poisoning either if it's a high enough dosage to kill you. So with hemlock, I think it's a really cool idea to do is that you could totally do that with a failed foraging roll. That's super fun, or bushcraft if you're in a lamitation situation.
It's totally evil, but
that's very, very
maybe just like once.
Yeah.
You probably shouldn't do it every time, but maybe just once. Your party probably should have had either, what is it that have bushcraft? Is it hobbits? No, halflings?
Halflings have
in that system?
Yep.
Right? Or specialists. You probably should have had one of those things in your party.
A fun thing, though, that you could do is if you are looking to poison someone in the group, hemlock would be the way to go because parsley is a common seasoning. As long as you're crafty and you make sure the right person gets it, you season everybody's food with parsley, you season theirs with hemlock.
Sneaky and diabolical.
Away we go.
And I like where your head's at.
Exactly. Real easy to take care of there. Now, this one, the poison is largely contained in the seeds, is where it's the most concentrated, and there is no antidote for this one either. This one can kill you within 30 minutes to an hour, which is another fast-acting poison. Something interesting, though, is they actually had problems where birds would eat the berries and eat the seeds. Then the birds would be cooked, and the poison still deadly in the seeds. So you might eat that bird and then be poisoned by the roots and seeds of this plant, which I thought was crazy, interesting, and scary because a lot of these aren't poisonous to other creatures. They're only poisonous to people because our metabolisms and all that kind of stuff work differently. So it was very interesting and kind of scary. And
one of the things
I'm sorry, I said berries. It's roots. It's mostly the poison is mostly contained on the roots in hemlock. So
the other thing I found interesting about hemlock, you see with it, you get the some of the other similar symptoms to what we talked about, except with the abdomen, you get this burning abdominal pain. But the other two things that I noticed about this, in addition to kind of the CNS depression, central nervous system depression, rhabdomyolysis is when your muscles break down. So maybe you're kind of a little weak or falling down or kind of herky-jerky in your movements, but you get dilated pupils, which we see with a lot of the others. But in this, you also get increased salivation. And the other thing where you find dilated pupils and increased salivation is rabies. And I thought that could be a cool kind of red herring sort of thing to play on, because when you see a creature with dilated pupils and foaming at the mouth, saliva dripping everywhere, everybody's first reaction is, oh my God, it's a rabid animal.
Right.
And so I kind of like the idea of maybe sort of tripping people up with that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's very cool. I didn't think of it that way. And the increased salivation isn't just like you're slobbering. It's uncontrollable. It's coming out of your mouth, literally constantly spitting, drooling, sometimes even maybe foaming if they're excited. So it's a lot. The other one is, did you mention the burning abdomen with this? I
did at the beginning. It's not so much tied with the rabies thing, which is just kind of what I picked out, but you could definitely... the feeling of having your belly on fire.
Right. And it's interesting because there are certain medical conditions where we associate very specific adjectives with them, like tearing chest pain is associated with
aortic dissection.
An aortic dissection. You said it. Never mind. Anyway, and also there's trembling and weakness associated with this, which also kind of ties into the rhabdomyolysis. Another interesting thing with this one is that it progresses from tachycardia to bradycardia. So from having heart palpitations and my heart is running away to where as it progresses, it gradually gets slower and slower and slower.
The hemlock, you have the potential for coma. So in a scenario where you've created this coma but not quite death, that creates an interesting bit of trickery for your players to deal with too. So let's say one of them was to become poisoned with this hemlock, but isn't dead. But now you have this unconscious party member that you have to deal with. It's kind of like the same thing as, and I have this baby. What am I supposed to do with it now?
Right. Or what if you want to teach one of your party members a lesson and they've been messing with you too much, so you give them enough of the hemlock to put them into a coma for a day.
That'd be a really good role. Like the line between coma and death is so very thin.
Or just a happy accident. I don't know. Either way. So, all right. The next one on our list is Monk's Hood or Wolfsbane. And the active ingredient in this one is called Acontine, ACONITINE, I believe. And its LD50 is 2 milligrams per kilogram. So now we're getting into this range where you're talking about not a whole lot. And a milligram is not a lot of weight. It's not much there. So this is starting to get to where it's very deadly stuff. This one, even today, still has no antidote in a modern days.
And it wins the award for coolest name.
It does. So the interesting thing is, a little bit of lore behind this one I found out, is that Wolfsbane is often associated with things for werewolves and lycanthropy and keeping werewolves away, but that actually has nothing to do with that. It's a very fast-acting poison. So what people used to do when they would be dealing with wolves is they would have this powder of the Wolfsbane or Monk's Hood, and they would dip their arrows in it, and they would shoot the wolf, and the poison would kill them. So it was just a poison they specifically used on arrows to kill wolves, and that's where the name comes from.
But you could certainly present it on arrows. Maybe you have somebody playing a barbarian who just never seems to take any damage and is mowing through your NPCs. Well, maybe this woodsy tribe that is getting in the way now has poison arrows with Wolfsbane. Mm-hmm. It'd be so much more exciting that way. Now,
the interesting thing about Wolfsbane is this is not a poison that you could give to somebody by mouth, because it burns your mouth. If you get it, it's a kind of a caustic, acidic.
It's tingling on your tongue, tastes very foul and bitter. They would immediately know that something was up.
Yes, exactly. So this is one that is going to be injected or some other method, or even if you just gave it by mouth and said, suck it up, you're chained down and you're going to have, a bitter burning mouth. And the way I read it was described as not necessarily tingling, but actually a burning sensation in your mouth.
Battery acid.
Yes. So this poison is found in the tubes of the leaf and in the roots of the Monk's Hood or Wolfsbane plant. And the Monk's Hood, the reason they call it Monk's Hood is it's a flower, and it looks like a monk's hood, like covering the flower portion, the sexual parts of the flower or whatever, the pistil and stamen and all that stuff. Again, this one is pretty fast acting, so 4 hours, can be death at 4 hours. I can't remember, I have this note down, but it's without dust and without struggle is actually the Latin name for the actual plant is what it translates to. So that's like fast acting and it's going to kill you. So the symptoms that come along with this one again are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, which you see with all that kind of stuff. And that's just your body trying to flush the toxin out of itself. It's like, hey, evacuate everything. There's a problem. Something bad is inside us. So tingling in the mouth and the face, that's along with if you get dosed with it by mouth, it's going to burn. But even if you just have it given to you, your face, mouth, and tongue and face are going to tingle. Respiratory distress, bradycardia, seizures, and paralysis. So cool thing. I just really thought that the interesting part of it was that it's actually not associated with lycanthropy in any way. It's just simply that they use it to kill wolves before.
But it could be.
Oh, yeah. Totally. All right. So our next one is oleander, and its LD50 is 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. So now we're talking about some very, very deadly, dangerous chemicals. To give you a perspective of that, 20 leaves of this plant could be deadly for an adult. So not much, right? And the interesting thing about this one is that you could dry it out and it still retains the poisonous qualities. So you could dry these leaves out, crush them up into a powder, or even make them into a tea and brew a tea with it, and the tea would be then deadly.
And I really like the idea of the deadly tea.
Yeah,
I mean, we kind of talked about the Mad Hatter's Tea Party before, but I feel like when you talk about the midwife, the good witch,
right,
sort of stereotypical character, but maybe she's got some other stuff happening that you're not quite aware of, So this is definitely something else that you can put one of your NPCs up to sort of throw things off, throw a little curveball in there.
Right. And then the associated symptoms with this one is going to be abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea again, coma. So if you want to dose it correctly, maybe do what we talked about before with the hemlock, and increased salivation, tremors, and death. So there isn't necessarily the distinctive thing about this one to be able to narrow it down to it's this oleander maybe, but there's not necessarily a very specific symptom for it, but very deadly, and you could very easily make this into a tea or a powder. So, and our last one and the most deadly is foxglove. And the active ingredient in this one is called digitalis, and this is actually a modern day medicine that we use to treat atrial fibrillation. So, all right, in AFib?
Different cardiac arrhythmias.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, digoxin, as you might suspect from the lethal dose of this being so small, has a very, what we call, narrow therapeutic index,
right.
Which means if it is too low, you're going to have problems and it's not going to be effective. If it's too high, you get digoxin toxicity.
Yeah.
And the modern day antidote is called Digibind.
But that's not
of course
that
did not exist
right.
in this time period.
So the LD50 for this one is 0.3 milligrams per kilogram. So this is even less than the 0.5. So this is when you think about how much physically you would have to give to someone when you're looking at the hemlock, which was 5 milligrams per kilogram, right? And then we look at the oleander, which is 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. That's literally 10% of what you would have to give is lethal, right? And this foxglove, you're looking at a little more than half, about 60% of the dosage for foxglove compared to oleander. So this is very, very small amounts. And this one, just like oleander, it retains its poisonous
properties after it's been dried. So it can be used as leaves or in powder form.
Yep.
It also has the most interesting symptoms out of all of them.
So this one, it says vague symptoms, and if you have ever dealt with or have a relative who's had digitalis and they're not in that therapeutic range, they have some really kind of weird symptoms that go along with it, and they're kind of vague. So nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, confusion, blurred vision. One of my favorite ones that I saw on here is color perception changes. So as it turns out, when Van Gogh was painting, he has a period that's called the yellow period, and it's marked by a lot of his artwork has all these strong yellow tones in it. The Café de Paris has it. There's the couple,
sunflowers.
Yeah,
seems like the obvious thing to point. I don't know. Is that in the yellow? I would assume it would be.
So you can look up his yellow period and you'll be able to see it. But what's interesting is during that time period, he was actually taking digitalis for epileptic seizures because they were using it as a treatment for that at that time. So what it's kind of telling us is that during that time, he was being overdosed by the digitalis and was giving him these perception changes, and he was seeing all this yellow color that wasn't there. That's how his eyes were perceiving them.
Well, aside from the yellow vision too, it also comes along with blurred vision, so that may explain
the expressionism.
some of that as well.
Right. Yeah, I had an art teacher one time that was like, what if he just had glaucoma? And I was like, oh, that's weird. That's interesting. So, but along with all that, there's AFib, which is like an irregular heartbeat, vertigo, so dizziness.
Probably but vertigo is not dizziness.
No, it's much more, but yeah.
Vertigo is, and also not just the Alfred Hitchcock film. It is the feeling described as the room is spinning. Mm-hmm. It is the carnival ride that you cannot get off of.
Right.
And unlike where like a little mild dizziness might make you a little off balance, significant vertigo will make you unable to walk without falling down.
And vomiting and just feeling of
very
awful
badness.
Right.
Yes. And delirium. So vertigo and delirium are probably my two favorite symptoms on this, along with the yellow color that really sets it over the top for me, because delirium is just an interesting thing. Even to this day, it's just very intriguing. You know,
the way it was described,
it's like
to me,
an acute confusion, but it's more than that. It's you know, it's telling somebody something and then being like, yeah, okay, but then immediately not remembering what you said and not being able to make sense of what you say.
Right. It's sort of like an acute version of Alzheimer's. That's the dumbed down version, the way it was kind of,
sudden onset of severe dementia.
Yeah. Yep. So it was an interesting way to present it. We had some continuing education that talked about it. And then along with that, there's lethal heart rhythms that come along with this. So AFib, and then it leads into AFib with RVR, VTAC, all the bad lethal heart rhythms that you do CPR for.
For those of you, that aren't in the medical profession, basically anytime something is a fib, it stands for fibrillation. And instead of your heart squeezing like it's supposed to, now it's just sort of trembling or quivering, if you will, instead of pushing things like it's supposed to.
Yeah. So very deadly. And interesting thing about this one is there is a modern day antidote for Dig, but if you were poisoned by this, the period antidote for this, they would treat it with belladonna. Now, it doesn't actually stop you from being poisoned by the digitalis. What it does is it sort of tries to mitigate the cardiac problems that you're having. So if you're having...
Oh, that's interesting because it causes tachydysrhythmias and atropine. Yeah. Huh. That is fascinating.
Yeah, so that's it. So it's not actually an antidote, but that's one of the things that they used to do in medieval times or whatever before modern medicine, is that if you were poisoned by foxglove, they would try and give you belladonna because it's a parasympathomimetic. But anyway, but what the belladonna can do is it can kind of mitigate one of the heart blocks that is caused, or not one of, but all of the heart blocks that is caused by this foxglove. And sort of atropine doesn't actually make you go faster. It takes your foot off the brake, essentially is the way it works, but it speeds your heart up, essentially, is the long and short of it. So it's one of the things that they would do. So this one sort of has a treatment for it, but not really. So
the treatment is just as likely to kill you.
Right.
You're definitely going to die without it. You're probably still going to die with it.
So right on. So that's the 6 that we have focused on here. And this could go on for a long time because there's lots of poisonous things out there. But these ones are largely found in the U.S., North America, or in Europe. So there's lots of other poisonous things out there. We didn't go into mushrooms at all, and there's a lot of poisonous mushrooms. The thing with those is, though, that for most of them, they're actually not deadly unless you eat a lot of them. It actually comes along with nausea, vomiting, feeling just terrible, and that kind of stuff. They're actually not necessarily going to kill you in terms of a game sense or whatever. So
just, I would say, from a GM perspective, maybe pick out something you want to focus on and highlight the symptoms of it, or keep them as a consideration when you're creating NPCs for like witches or herbalists or midwives or anybody else that deals with sort of natural medicines, remedies, poisons. If you're doing a low magic world, but you want to still have some interesting abilities and effects present, this is a good way to do that.
Right.
Sort of that magician.
Or you could totally challenge them and make them wonder, is this a mystical poison? Or is this a mystical effect? When in fact, it's actually just a poison.
Right.
They're like, that not knowing is more interesting than being in a supernatural world or a mundane world, I think, sometimes.
And I like the idea of these too for the accessibility of them, right? Because they're all essentially growing in the nature.
Yeah.
So instead of now, having to get the funds and go to buy these things, there's a potential that your characters could encounter them when they're foraging, either as a terrible, terrible accident, or maybe that's what they're setting out to look for. And you can have them, make their bushcraft or survival rolls for that.
Right on. So just to mention again here at the end, the very specific symptoms for some of them. The U comes along with blue lips. That's the very specific one for it. Belladonna is the dry as a bone, mad as a hatter, red as a beet, blind as a bat, and hot as a hare. Hemlock is the pupil dilation like you have with belladonna, but increased salivation and the burning abdomen. Wolfsbane and monk's hood is this tingling of the face and the mouth, seizures, shortness of breath, and paralysis. And then foxglove is that delirium, the yellow vision, and just vision perception issues there, kind of vague symptoms. And
oleander doesn't really have anything specific. That's its specific thing.
Right. And again, the oleander and the foxglove could be made into a tea or a powder and be used that way. So we may revisit this one as in a modern one with some hazmat stuff that could be really crazy scary. But is there anything about these that you want to geek out about a little bit, or?
I feel like I already did. My stuff was all non-specific things that I just thought were neat.
Well, I just thought this is a really cool, interesting way, if you have druids in your game, to make them much more relevant. Because a lot of times druids are just sort of like, yeah, it's that nature guy, whatever. He turns into a bear and likes plants and trees and gets mad when he make forest fires or whatever. But this is a way that you could make their skills very relevant and matter very much. And if you're in a fantasy world, it's entirely possible that while Hemlock in our world doesn't have an antidote, maybe in the Middle Earth it does. So then they have to go find whatever this other flower is or whatever and use it as an antidote. And that's a really cool way that you could incorporate your druid in a skill set that no one else has. Right on. So again, like, we're not toxicologists, so we may have gotten some of these details wrong here or whatever, but we do have a fair amount of experience with a lot of these symptoms and that kind of stuff and how they're managed and how they present themselves. So even if we got some of the minor details wrong, just focus on what you'll see in the people that have been poisoned, or there's no order to that, I guess. It's just the people who've been poisoned. So yeah, I don't know. I think poison is a totally underutilized thing in terms of using it to be interesting. I think it's generally just used as a die roll and a save, and then you lose some dex or con or whatever. So I think this is a really cool way to add some interesting possibilities to your games in ways that your players have probably never experienced before. Because
I feel like it would be fun to make a random die roll chart for symptoms of poison. Like if you did nothing else with this, just like all the poison and you drop dead, like you could really describe a dramatic, gruesome death. Mm-hmm. If you had a nice jargon table for poisons.
True story. Like in Firefly for the technocrat stuff.
You're like, okay, roll a D4, a D6, a D8, and a D12, and those are your symptoms before you die.
Right. Well, and not even on top of that, if they make their save, or if they roll and fail their save, and they're going to have -2 dexterity or whatever, you could describe that dexterity as these vision changes that they have because their pupils are too dilated. So while it's more of a narrative thing in terms of how we talk about it, but the mechanical effect would be I can't see as well. I can't keep my eyes open as long. So now the way I move isn't as effective or whatever. There's a lot of cool ways that you could do that. If you have a strength related poison, maybe that
that works very easily in D&D because there's already a system in place for dark vision creatures that are trying to operate in the light. And it would basically be that.
Right. That'd be perfect. Right on. If you had a poison that does strength damage. Maybe we're looking at Hemlock with the rhabdomyolysis and our weakness, and it's the muscles are devouring themselves, and that's what's causing the strength loss. So I just think it's a cool way to add some interesting narrative and story and character potential development to what is just a -2 strength, because that's not interesting at all. There's nothing interesting about being down 2 points of strength, but there is loads of interesting potential because you've got these tremors now and all this stuff. So when you swing your sword, you're not as accurate, and
that's clearly a dexterity problem.
But yeah, but there's lots of cool ways to incorporate this, and I just think it's a way underutilized thing. So definitely worth checking out. And I think I'm going to use this to do some terrible things to my players at some point. So I'm keeping this list.
Well, that sounds magical.
So look forward to that if you're at our gaming table.
We should make a random chart and put it on the Patreon. Poison jargon table. In the works.
Very good. I think that's going to be a thing then. So look for that on our Patreon. If you're not subscribed to our Patreon and supporting us there, you can check that out. That'll be coming up there. I think you just volunteered yourself to put that together. Shouldn't be actually too hard.
Hell you say. I don't know how to make a table.
Alrighty, I think that'll do it for us this week. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one. If there's any other specific, interesting, medical things or whatever that you think would be cool, we've been talking about this a little bit, me and Lacey, because we have a fair amount of experience with this kind of stuff now in terms of what you're going to encounter in a role-playing game like emergency medicine. So if you guys have any specific topics or questions that you have that you would like us to address, we'd be more than happy to. It's something that we do and we're passionate about. So there's that.
It's near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah. So drop us a line. You can hit us up on Twitter or Facebook or email me, James@JustMoreFix. There's loads of ways out there. You guys know how to get a hold of us. So let us know if there's anything that you would like us to look into or talk about. Right on. So I think that'll do it for us this week. Don't forget, if you're in the Terre Haute area, you can come out and game with us this Saturday from 1 to 5 at Game on South 7th Street in Terre Haute. Look forward to seeing you guys there. We are going to make that a monthly thing where we're going to feature some different small press and indie RPGs there. So even if you can't make it this month, we'll be there again in June, July, and hopefully going forward. I don't think we're going to do August because of Gen Con, but give you guys a chance to come out and sit down and game with us and have some fun. Quick Gonna Geek promo for the On the Bubble podcast, Marvel's Most Wanted, the fan campaign to get ABC to release the Most Wanted pilot. Today, we're taking a look at Marvel's Most Wanted pilot and the fan campaign to get ABC to release the pilot to the fans. I guess it's all contained in the title there, but I didn't realize that there was a pilot that wasn't released yet for a new Marvel series, so check that out. I'm not sure if there's what the campaign entails, but check them out on the Gonna Geek Network, and maybe we can get an awesome show released, or at least the pilot episode of it, if they don't Fox the show, like Serenity. Oh, sad day.
You say hurtfuls like that.
Right on. So I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show that we did finish recording our second session of our Night Watch's actual play. So that will be coming out to you guys here soon as it goes through the editing podcast. And if you're a supporter at our Patreon, as soon as it is done, all the episodes go up on there and you don't have to wait for the bi-weekly release of that. So check that out. And as always, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.